Have you ever lain awake at night, right next to the person you promised to love forever, and felt completely and utterly alone? Not because they are unkind. Not because they have done anything terrible. But because somewhere along the way, the warmth that once filled the space between you has quietly turned to distance, and you don't even know when it happened. You are not really fighting about the dishes left in the sink, or the bills that need paying, or who forgot to call whom. Underneath all of that noise is something far deeper, something neither of you can quite put into words. It is a silence that grows heavier with every passing year. It is a gap that somehow widens even while you sleep under the same blanket, in the same bed, in the same home you built together. Maybe you have found yourself staring at the ceiling, wondering, how did we become like this? Where did the person I fell in love with go? Maybe you have felt the ache of reaching out, only to be met with silence, or worse, indifference. If any of this feels familiar, if your heart recognized even a small piece of itself in these words, then I want you to stay with me for the next few minutes. Because today, we are not going to look at marriage the way the world usually teaches us to. We are not going to talk about compromise, or communication techniques, or relationship hacks. Instead, we are going to look at the husband and wife relationship through a far deeper lens, through the eyes of a soul who saw beyond the body, beyond the ego, beyond the personality, straight into the deepest truth of why two people are drawn together in this life, and why, sometimes, they end up hurting each other the most. This is husband versus wife, according to the timeless wisdom of Paramahansa Yogananda. Every marriage begins with a feeling of completeness. Two people look into each other's eyes and think, finally, I am not alone. Finally, someone sees me, understands me, chooses me above everyone else in this world. There is a lightness in those early days, a sense that two halves have somehow found their way to becoming whole. But slowly, quietly, almost without either person noticing, something begins to shift. The husband comes home and says less than he used to. The wife waits for words that once came so easily, and now do not come at all. Small irritations, the kind that would have been forgotten in a moment during the early years, begin to settle into the heart and grow into large, lingering wounds. A forgotten anniversary is no longer just a slip of memory. It becomes proof, in the wounded mind, that one is no longer loved the way they once were. A single raised voice becomes a memory that replays itself again and again, long after the argument has ended. This is the hidden problem beneath almost every struggling marriage. Two souls came together seeking a wholeness outside of themselves, and slowly, painfully, they discovered that the other person cannot fill a hole that was never meant to be filled by another human being in the first place. There is a hunger in the human soul, ancient and deep, a hunger not for another person, but for the infinite itself, for a love without condition and without end. And when we place this vast hunger entirely upon our husband or our wife, we are quietly asking a limited human being to give us something that only the divine was ever meant to provide in full. This is not to say that human love means nothing. It means everything. But so much of the pain we feel in marriage is the pain of expecting a finite being to be an infinite source. Why does this happen to so many good, sincere, well-meaning people? Why do two souls who once looked at each other with such tenderness slowly drift into misunderstanding? From a spiritual perspective, most of us enter marriage while we are still, in a very real sense, asleep. Asleep not to the world around us, but to our own inner nature. We fall in love with a feeling, with an idea, with an image we have quietly built in our own mind of who this person is. We see our own reflection shining back at us in their eyes, and in that moment, we mistake our reflection for their soul. We call it love, when really, we have not yet learned to see them at all. From a more psychological angle, this shows itself very clearly in everyday life. A man may have grown up in a home where love was never spoken aloud, only implied through duty, through hard work, through quiet sacrifice. So he expresses his love the only way he knows how, through providing, through responsibility, through staying late to secure his family's future. And he feels genuinely confused, even hurt, when his wife says to him, "You never tell me that you love me." A woman, on the other hand, may have grown up longing for emotional safety, for reassurance that she is truly seen. So she asks questions, she seeks closeness, she needs to hear the words. And her husband, overwhelmed by what feels like pressure, retreats further into silence, mistaking her very real need for control. Neither of them is wrong. Both are simply speaking a language shaped by their own past wounds, their own inner patterns, formed long before they ever crossed paths with one another. This is why the conflict happens, not because love is absent, but because awareness, so often, is still asleep. Yogananda often spoke of the soul's long and ancient journey across many lifetimes, and how the people who enter our lives, especially the one who becomes our husband or our wife, are rarely there by pure accident. He taught that we attract into marriage exactly the soul we need for our growth, whether that growth comes wrapped in sweetness or arrives through friction and difficulty. A hard marriage is not always a punishment. Sometimes, quietly, it is a classroom. The very qualities that irritate us most in our spouse are often mirrors, held up before us, showing us the very things we still need to heal within our own selves. Let me share with you a small story. There was once a woman named Leela who prayed every single night for God to change her husband, to make him more patient, more attentive, more openly loving. Years passed this way. Nothing seemed to change. Then, one night, in a dream, she saw herself standing before a vast, ancient mirror. And in that mirror, she did not see her husband's face looking back at her. She saw her own face. Impatient. Withholding. Afraid to be vulnerable first. She woke up weeping, not from sadness, but from a strange and humbling clarity that settled over her like morning light. She realized, in that quiet moment, that she had been asking the universe to change the reflection, instead of gently tending to the one standing right in front of the mirror. Slowly, over time, she began to change, not her husband, but her own reactions, her own openness, her own willingness to soften first. And strangely, wonderfully, as she softened, so did he. This is the quiet, unshakable law of karma within marriage. What we sow in patience, in understanding, and in honesty, we eventually receive back in kind. What we sow in blame, we often receive back only as distance. How do you know when this pattern has quietly taken root in your own marriage? Notice if you often find yourself thinking, if only my spouse would change, then I would finally be happy. This single thought, so common, so understandable, is a gentle sign that you have placed your peace entirely in someone else's hands, someone who was never meant to carry that weight alone. Notice if silence has slowly replaced conversation in your home. Not the peaceful, comfortable silence of two souls who feel safe simply sitting together, but a guarded silence, the kind that comes from two people who have grown afraid to be truly seen by one another. Notice if you find yourself keeping a quiet mental list of your spouse's failures, replaying old wounds again and again, pulling them out as evidence in every new argument, even ones that have nothing to do with the past. Notice, too, if intimacy has slowly become something transactional, a reward given only for good behavior, rather than a genuine, freely given expression of closeness and love. Perhaps, as you listen to this, you recognize yourself in the husband who buries himself in work, not out of neglect, but to avoid the discomfort of difficult emotional conversations waiting for him at home. Or perhaps you recognize yourself in the wife who criticizes, not because she wishes to wound, but because she is desperate, after so long, simply to be heard. These signs, painful as they may feel, are not proof of a broken marriage. They are not the end of the story. They are simply signs of two souls who, somewhere along the way, forgot how to meet each other with fresh eyes, with the same wonder they once had at the very beginning, before the world, and life, and old wounds got in the way. If you have seen yourself in any of this, please know, gently, that this is not the end of the story. It can, in fact, be the beginning of a much deeper one. The first step toward healing is to stop asking your spouse to complete you, and instead, quietly turn the question inward. Ask yourself, what within me still feels incomplete? This is not about blame. It is not about criticizing yourself the way you may have been criticizing your partner. It is about gently reclaiming your own wholeness, so that you come to your marriage not out of hunger, not out of a desperate need to be filled, but out of a genuine, overflowing love. The second step is to listen with the intention to understand, rather than the intention to respond. When your spouse speaks to you, even if their words come wrapped in frustration, try to hear the unmet need trembling beneath them. Behind almost every complaint, no matter how sharp it sounds, there is a quiet, simple plea. Please see me. Please value me. The third step is small, consistent kindness, practiced daily. Yogananda often reminded his students that spiritual growth is rarely made of grand, dramatic gestures. It is made of humble, repeated practice. A gentle word offered in the morning. A patient pause taken before reacting in anger. A single moment of real, undivided presence at the end of a long and tiring day. These small acts, repeated with sincerity over time, slowly rebuild what harsh words have worn away. And finally, gently bring the divine into your relationship, not as religion, not as ritual, but as remembrance. When you remember that your spouse's soul, just like your own, is on a long journey home to the very same infinite source, it becomes very difficult to stay angry for long. You begin to see them not as an opponent, but as a fellow traveler, sometimes stumbling, just as you yourself sometimes stumble. Here is the deepest truth that Yogananda offered us about human relationships. Marriage, at its very highest, was never meant to be the destination. It was always meant to be a doorway. A doorway through which two souls help one another grow in patience, in selflessness, in the quiet capacity to love without condition, without keeping score, without waiting to be loved first. And slowly, gradually, the love that two people practice with each other in daily life begins to become a reflection of a far greater love, a love that holds them both, that held them long before they ever met, and will hold them long after this life is over. The husband and wife who argue over small things, over dishes left in the sink, over words spoken too sharply, over silences that stretch too long, are, underneath it all, simply two souls trying to remember how to love without fear. Every conflict, every misunderstanding, every night spent lying awake in quiet hurt, is in truth an invitation. Not an invitation to walk away. Not an invitation to give up. But an invitation to wake up. So the next time you feel that familiar ache of distance from the one you love, I gently ask you to pause before you speak in anger. Take a breath and ask yourself quietly, is this really about the dishes, or the words, or the silence? Or is my soul, in its own patient way, asking me to grow? Because in the end, the marriage in front of you may be one of the greatest teachers your soul will ever know. Not because it is easy, but because it asks you to become more loving, more patient, and more awake than you ever thought you could be. And in becoming that, you come closer, one gentle step at a time, to the very source of love itself. If this message touched something quiet inside you, I invite you to pause for just a moment before you rush back into the busyness of your day. Let it settle. Let it breathe. Because sometimes the most important shifts in our lives do not happen through grand events, but through a single quiet thought that we finally allow ourselves to sit with. So before you go, ask yourself gently, honestly, without judgment. In your own relationship, are you asking your partner to complete you, to fill a space that was never truly theirs to fill? Or are you willing, starting today, to grow together, side by side, towards something greater than both of you could ever become alone? There is no wrong answer here. There is only the beginning of awareness, and awareness is always where healing begins. If these words brought you even a small measure of peace today, I would be so grateful if you would take a moment to write a comment below, sharing which part of this video spoke to you the most, or perhaps a moment from your own life that came to mind while you were listening. Your reflections mean more than you know, and they often help others who are quietly going through the very same thing. I would also love to hear from you. What subject would you like us to explore together in our next video? Your voice truly helps shape this space, so please share your thoughts below. And if you found value in this message, I gently invite you to subscribe, so more reflections like this one can find you exactly when you need them most. If someone you love came to mind while watching, consider sharing this with them. Until we meet again, may your heart find the peace it has always been searching for. Jai Gurudev.